one of the most important things for people to recognize is that it's often their own thoughts that get in their way.
Hello and welcome back to 40-Minute Mentor, your weekly dose of pocket-sized career mentorship. Before we kick off Series 12 in a few weeks, we wanted to shine a light on some of our previous 40-Minute Mentors. Starting today, we'll be resharing a selection of 40-Minute Mentor episodes from our archives. First up, we're revisiting our episode with the brilliant Helen Tupper, co-founder and CEO of Amazing If and co-host of the popular Squiggly Careers podcast, a personal favourite of mine. In this episode, Helen shares the origin story behind Amazing If and Squiggly Careers, plus tons of career mentorship for anyone that may be feeling stuck in their career at the moment. So without further ado, here are 40 minutes of fabulous mentorship with the wonderful Helen Tupper. Helen, welcome to the 40-Minute Mentor. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you very much for inviting me on.
Awesome. No, it's an absolute pleasure. We always like to get our guests to do a quick fire round to kick things off, to warm you up. So if you don't mind finishing these sentences, we will get into it. Is that cool?
Yes, off we go. Ready, raring.
Awesome. When I was younger, I always wanted to be
a geologist.
Ooh, different. I like that. Any particular reason?
My uncle was, and I don't think I knew anything about the world of work, so I just attached myself to someone in my family. Also, I do really like shiny stones, so that was probably the logic behind it. I'm rubbish at geography, but I like shiny things.
That is something, yeah. I must admit, I had like a truckload of stones that I used to take around with me, amethyst and things like that. Yeah, that's a good one. Right, second question. My first job was...
So very, very first one that I got money for was working in the corner shop, behind the counter in my village. There weren't many jobs in a small village in Lincolnshire. I think I found the only one working for the corner shop. I think that's a good start to your Customer
career,
service
actually.
Skills,
yeah,
commerciality.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Love it. Amazing. When starting my career, I wish I'd have known
that the earlier you nurture your network, the better.
That is such a good one. As from someone that has spent years trying to convince people networking isn't a dirty thing, I think there's a lot in that. Thank you. I'm most energized at work when
I'm talking to clients. I love it. I will text my business partner afterwards and I'll be like, we're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing that. And she'll be like, oh my goodness. I'm not so good or energized by creating all the plans and proposals, but in that moment, talking to clients and coming up with solutions, I love it.
We are so alike. That is exactly what I would answer. And finally, can you share something we wouldn't learn from your CV? That could be a perceived failure or a setback in your career that you've learned a lot from.
Do you know, it's not a failure, actually. It's just that 3 of the companies that I went to work for, and I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit more, but the job that I started that company to do, and the one that I'd sort of changed my previous organisation or to go to this brand new company, do this brand new job, those jobs changed within 3 months of me joining the company. So it's almost like the dream that I've been like, I'm going to apply for this job, I'm going to go to work for Microsoft or go to work for Virgin. Yeah, within 3 months. And actually within Virgin, within 1 day of joining the company, the job that I'd intended and joined to do changed completely. So I think it just taught me to be adaptable and to join the company more than the job, because then the change doesn't really matter because you're in the right place. You just got to find the right thing to do.
Yeah, that's great advice. And no, really interesting. Thank you so much, Helen. I think we've already got a great little glimpse into you, and I'm really keen to dig into your amazing career and particularly talk about Amazing If. But before we do, I think it'd be good to start a little bit on earlier parts of your career and the lessons you've learned along the way. So you mentioned a couple of the brands you've worked for. So Virgin, Microsoft, some really big hitting corporates. What did you take from sort of your experience in those types of global organizations? And what were some of your personal highlights from that first part of your career?
So what did I take from them? I took that large organizations are complex places, but sometimes unnecessarily so, just because they have a lot of people and a lot of processes, and that actually you don't always have to be the smartest person in the room or the person that's worked there the longest. Actually, you can add a lot of value in a large organization by being the person who creates clarity. And I think that because I was never, I never stayed in any organization for a really long time. I was never going to be the most expert in that industry or in that organization. But I think I was always very good at creating clarity. And that helped me to make a difference quite quickly. So I think that's probably one of the main things that I learned from working in those different organizations. And then the second thing, like some of the memorable moments, loads for different reasons. I remember being at Microsoft. And Microsoft I don't know what's going on at the moment with all things COVID, but they have this annual conference called Inspire, and they went to Vegas, and everybody, they have these people that they take from all over the world, go to Vegas, and we're like thousands. I think it's like 10, 15,000 people go from Microsoft to this epic event in Vegas. And it made me feel the power of an organization that was that big and had that much impact on the world. And I think I sat there honestly a bit in awe, James. I was like, wow, I am the smallest I'm like an ant in this large organization, but to feel the energy of that business at this big epic event, that felt really, it was a memorable moment. And then, before that at Virgin, I had the opportunity to launch a brand new business for Virgin, like from scratch, design it, pitch it, get it started. And I never dreamed that I would have the opportunity to do something like that. And I loved it. And I learned a lot in doing it about myself and about starting a business, which I guess I took all of that into my own business as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things. I don't think it needs to be either or when it comes to corporate life or startup life. You can take so much from working in bigger organizations that you then take into your startups, and I certainly did that myself. We talked to a lot of candidates about the pros and cons of working for bigger organizations versus high growth startups and scale ups, which is the types of companies that we recruit into. What initially drew you to those bigger brands, and if you were to start over again, would you do anything different?
If I think about, so I guess the big brands on my CV, most of my CV is made up of big brands, and I work for a very small one, which is my own. But, Procter & Gamble, Microsoft, Capital One, Eon, BP, lots of big brands. I like the scale that those organizations have, the global element, the number of customers they have, the budgets. And I think I was, one of my values is achievement. And I think the earlier part of my career, I think I'd got into my head that the bigger the brand, the bigger the achievement. And so that I was sort of connecting to that by working for some of those companies. I think more laterally in my career, I've kind of realized that achievement, you don't have to be working for a large organization to have a significant sense of achievement. Actually, now I work for a very small business, but I have a very big sense of achievement. So I think I've got to that realization more recently. But in my earlier career, working for a big brand was a shortcut to getting that sense of achievement that was so important to me.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And we hear that a lot. You mentioned values there. I think that's really interesting. Do you have like a set sort of value set that you kind of live your life to, and, when it comes to careers? Because that's really interesting. I'd love to delve into that.
I have 4 core values, which I reflected on with a coach, 10, 12 years ago, and have sort of stuck with me since, and very helpful as a guide for my career. So they are freedom, growth, energy, and achievement. And I reflect on them regularly to help me to be happy in my work. So if I'm ever a bit like, this doesn't quite feel right, going to my values is the first thing that I do to try and work out why. And whenever I have choices in front of me, do I go and be a trustee for that charity, or is this where I want to take my role in my own business? Whenever I'm faced with a career choice, before I find myself a little bit swayed by like a shiny object, like, that would be a good new title to have, and someone else's opinion or expectation about what I should do, I always think about my values and think, well, which one of these options gives me more freedom, growth, energy, and achievement? And it just balances me a little bit when I might find myself a little bit swayed by one of those things.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's something that probably a lot of people listening maybe don't have, but maybe should. And I'm one of them, actually. I've never distilled it like that, but I think I'm definitely a bit of a magpie. I love talking to people. I love, as you just said, I love talking to new clients and winning work. And I think probably one of the downsides of that is you can overstretch yourself and it kind of gets a bit overwhelming at times. So I think sometimes just having that a kind of barometer that you live by, that you just sort of say, does this fit in? I think that's a great way of looking at things. So thank you for sharing that. Together with your friend and co-founder, Sarah Ellis, you ultimately decided to kind of move away from that corporate world and pursue Amazing If as a full-time organization. So do you mind sharing with our listeners a bit about that journey and how you knew it was the right time to kind of take the plunge and leave that safety net of a corporate?
Yeah, so we started the business as a side project with no intention of it ever being a business. So I was at Virgin, so it was 2013. I was at Virgin, like launching that business that I mentioned. Sarah was at Sainsbury's. She was head of corporate social responsibility. And we're both really happy in what we're doing, loving big company life. And our teams were getting bigger, so we were managing more people. And Sarah and I, for context, we'd gone to university together back in like 2001. We'd been at university together and we'd stayed friends since. And we just happened to be reflecting on our own careers in 2013. And one of the things that we realised was that we were really happy in our careers. We're like, isn't this amazing? But that actually a lot of people that either were working for us or were coming to us for some form of career support, like a mentoring kind of relationship, they were less happy. And they all seem to have really similar questions, like don't really know what I want to do, don't know if I'm doing the right thing, don't feel like I'm making the difference that I want. And when we tried to find them some sources of support, it just didn't feel quite right. It was either a bit academic. It was a bit like, here's some research that they've done over here, which didn't really feel kind of energizing or practical enough. Or it was a little bit too aspirational, inspirational, you know, like the nice quote you stick on a wall, go just do a job you love. And it didn't feel like there was this practical stuff in the middle that could actually help people take action. And so we said, well, why don't we like join forces? There have been some things that have helped us. Sarah and I spark off each other, and we thought, well, we can create any gaps that we think are in this kind of source of support. And so we started running evening courses in London, and we did that for a really long time. We'd do our day jobs twice a month. We'd run to this venue that we hired in London, and we'd run these evening sessions. And we used to give about half the places away, and half the places were paid for us. And as long as it covered the room rent that we paid at the time, which is £250 a night, as long as it covered that, we were like, it's fine, because our job is to help people. At the time, we've talked about having happier careers, and that's what matters. And, you know, we learned a lot from those sessions. Sometimes we had 30 people, sometimes we had 6 people, and I'd be like, this is an intimate session tonight. Let's get into a circle. And we learned a lot about career development and people and how to deliver learning that lasts. And that started to scale. So those people started to go into their organisations and say, oh, could you come into my company and do this? And so we started using our holiday from Virgin and Sainsbury's to deliver these sessions. And then it started getting bigger. Our teams were getting bigger. We had some children between us. And some of the, you know, the reality of running a side project that started scaling alongside a corporate career that was also gaining quite a lot of momentum, it started to become unsustainable at one point. And so I was at Microsoft. Microsoft were talking to me about doing my next role. And at the time I was commercial marketing director, and they were talking to me about doing my next role at the same time as Penguin were talking to us about our book deal. And I thought, this may be one plate too many spinning. And that was the point at which I thought, make the leap. What is the worst that can happen? You can't viably scale the business. It can't pay for you. It can't pay for Sarah. And in which case, make that decision relatively quickly and go back to your marketing career, and you'll still have the credibility to do that. And so I left Microsoft in 2018, and I worked on the business for a year without Sarah. She was managing director of an ad agency at that point. And after a year of me scaling it, so the business didn't have to sustain two salaries, Sarah came over after a year, and then that was sort of 2019, and it's been growing quite quickly ever since then.
Amazing. I love that. It's a true example of a side hustle that becomes a great business. And I love the fact that you took the plunge and just went for it. And it clearly I guess you'd been building it over a number of years. So you'd kind of had the validation from all those customers, and it just evolved quite organically. But I to be honest with you, I'd heard about you guys from so many different sources, and then started listening to the podcast. And I absolutely love what you do. And it's really inspiring. And as somebody that has spent my whole career
helping others or around their careers as well. It's just something that I really, really admire. And firstly, massive kudos and congrats to you guys for all that you've done. I'm particularly interested as a solo founder myself. I'm always curious when I see people that have built a business with a co-founder and a friend in your instance. So how did you decide that it was the right thing to do together? And how has that impacted your friendship as you've built and run the business together? Because I can't imagine it's always plain sailing.
Wow. Yeah, it's really interesting. So back in 2013, I think Sarah had already been doing some sort of career development sessions for people for a charity, actually. And so she'd sort of had this idea. And I think one of the things that I'm really good doing is running with an idea, running with it, scaling it quickly. And so she kind of got this little nugget and I was like, right, we could do something with this. And I would book the venue and I would get it all done. And sometimes I almost move things forward too quickly. I will take an idea and it will be in the world before you know about it. And so I think Sarah and I recognised that we had a shared passion and different strengths to bring to it. And we saw that really quickly and we have sustained that throughout our business. So we love working together. We love helping people with their careers. And we both recognise that we bring very different things to the table, but they're actually really complementary. And we never compete with each other. So I'm never trying to be better than Sarah, the things that she's good at. I really admire that Sarah's great at coming up with ideas. And I really admire that she's thoughtful and considered. And she, I think, admires my speed and my pace and the fact that I really like making things happen. And so that's been really, really helpful for us. We always talk about being friends first. So being friends first and fixing friction fast. So when it comes to it, we will always respect the relationship that we have together. And that helps us to prioritize that over growing the business. Like if there was a choice between, the last 12 months has felt really hard, we've been disconnected from each other, and the next 12 months we could continue as is and grow the business, or we could reinvest in our relationship, Sarah and I would pick the relationship. We would invest in the relationship for the long term rather than short-term business growth. And we now know each other well enough to see when we are doing something which causes friction. So maybe Sarah's deliberating for something on too long and I'm trying to get it moving forward. We know that is one of our pressure points because she wants to pause and talk about stuff and I want to get it moving. And now we can call that really quickly and say, look, we know that we're both going to get annoyed at each other here. Let's put everything else to one side and move that agenda item to the top because neither of us are going to concentrate on the other stuff anyway. And then we just got very good at calling it now in, a 20-year friendship. We've been working together now for nearly 10 years on the business. And I think it just gives us that insight into each other.
That's so interesting. And it's so great that you've got that sort of partnership where you can kind of quash things quite quickly and you kind of know when something might be causing a bit of conflict. But then also, as you said earlier, there's that spark between you that you just spark off each other and you really have those complementary skills. How do you split the responsibilities within the business at the moment? How does that work? And do you have any advice for any co-founders listening that might be just starting off on this journey right now about how they can kind of manage it effectively?
Yeah, so I'm officially the CEO of the business. So I do all the finances and I guess some of the behind the scenes work that might be more administrative. And Sarah is kind of officially kind of our learning lead. So she does a lot of learning design. To some extent, they're slightly arbitrary titles, like it's useful to have a CEO of a business. But I think what we recognise is that there are certain things that we are better at and that we enjoy doing, and we are crafting our roles around those things. So I do like the operations of a business, and as our business grows, that is a role that I would like to grow into as well. I've never been a CEO before, so I think I look at that role and want to grow with it. So we divided those jobs up based on what energizes us and what we recognize that we both have strengths in. And we also dropped the ego. Like, I think that would probably be my advice. Like, think about what is the work that energizes you? Where do you bring the biggest value to the business based on your strengths? And therefore, what does it make sense for you to do job-wise? And drop the ego from that decision. Like, some people have co-CEOs, and that's fine. But when you take the ego away from it, I think you can just make sort of more logical, practical decisions. about where people have the most value.
That's such great advice. It does. I think ego is one of the biggest killer of businesses, isn't it? We often do see, sadly, with some of the startups we've worked with over the years, that some of the very best founders are the ones that know when to step aside for the good of their business and to take it to the next level, or when to bring in certain expertise, because they're just that, you get to the point when you're running a business, don't you, that you're kind of doing everything. You're a bit of a generalist. Then it comes to the point in scale where you just need to bring in experts, and there's no shame in that, is there? It's that actually says a lot about you, I think, as a leader, that you can kind of drop the ego and actually bring someone in. So that's such a good point. We haven't yet really touched upon Squiggly Careers, which is something that you're particularly well known for. And I'd love to touch upon that now, because this concept you've come up with has turned into this, obviously, a fantastic business. You've got a book, you've got this fantastic podcast. So to start us off, how do you define a squiggly career, and why do traditional career development programs not work for today's workforce?
Okay, so what is a squiggly career? A squiggly career is a career where there is a high level of unpredictability and uncertainty, but also a lot of possibility and opportunity. It's the idea that we are not expected to all develop in the same direction, that success isn't the same for all of us, and that we can't plan our way to some kind of predictable future. It's basically the reality of most people's work. And the thing that we really want people to do is to lose the idea of the ladder, because that starts to really limit more people than it helps. It starts to hold more people back. Just the idea that there's a one-size-fits-all version of a good career, and that moving in different directions is somehow bad. It just stops people from being their best at work and from exploring different directions. And so we just want to create careers that give people more permission to find out what they enjoy doing, what they do brilliantly, and where they might go in the future. They're just let's explore some options. And I think when we give people that permission and we create organizations and environments that enable people to have that movement and have that freedom in their careers, people are more committed, they're more engaged, they actually stay longer in their organizations when they have the freedom to move around their company. We want people to squiggle and stay. That's what we are really. Squiggly careers don't mean bouncing around from job to job and company to company. Though, maybe if that's what one of squiggly careers about, we don't want to kind of make that bad. But what we really want people to have the opportunity to do is to squiggle and stay in an organisation, because it is when someone is restricted and their career is constrained that they actually are more likely to leave a company, and that company will lose that value of that person.
Squiggle and stay. I love that. I absolutely love that, because I think we see far too often, we're talking to people that are unhappy in their jobs, and the only way that they see as the way, they only see a way out effectively, and so they come to us and they're looking for external opportunities. And it's a real shame, because in many of those instances there's lots of good in that company, they've done a great job, and you'd like to think if there's a slightly different culture in the firm, that they could actually maybe try different things. And that's certainly something that I've thought about for my own business, for JBM. We want to buck the trend in recruitment of attrition after a year or 18 months. We'd love, and we've been lucky enough to have people stay for a few years, and we really want to keep that. And part of it, I think, is making sure there is opportunity to try new things and progress. So I think that's just, it's really interesting, and I can see why this has really caught on. I think it's safe to say with the pandemic over the last 18 months, it has changed the way we work, and I think things are unlikely to go back to exactly the same way they were, and I think that's definitely a good thing in many ways. What changes have you seen through your work with Amazing If, and how do you think these new ways of working will affect people's career development? Sort of, how do they approach it? How should companies support them, etc.?
Practically, from Amazing If, our business has really evolved as a result of it, in that we used to go into organisations and rooms and deliver training, and now we do it in Zoom all over the world, and we do lots more sessions in a day. So from a very practical perspective, it has allowed us to reach far more people, which has been amazing in terms of our mission is to make careers better for everyone, and we can just reach more people. So that's really powerful. In terms of the individuals themselves and how it's changed careers and their development, I think that the first thing, I think people have a bit more power now, because they have reconsidered. A lot of people have sort of reflected on their career and thought, well, what does work look like? Now, some of the noise that went around my job has gone. And by noise, I mean the commute, the location of the office, the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis, the buzz in the all of that it's a lovely noise, but that's a lot quieter now. And I think when the volumes turn down on those things, the volume turns up on the actual job that you're doing. I think people are like, is this what I really want to do? Now all of that other noise has gone. And actually, now I'm no longer constrained perhaps by having to live near an office or, where I have to live myself because I can work remotely. Does that create more choices for me? And if you look at the job market at the moment, yes, it does there are more choices in the job market. And I think individuals have a little more power over that. So the flip side is, I think, therefore, you need to take ownership for your career. Like, yes, you might have more choice, and yes, you might have reflected more on what good work looks like for you, but you now also need to have more ownership over your career. You need to be able to work out, what are the strengths that you want to be known for, and how are you stretching those strengths, and how are you building your brand so it's meaningful for your current employer or your future employer. The point we talked about network earlier, so many of your opportunities will come through your network. So are you actively building the relationships that you need now or in the future? And I think it's those, you've got more choice, you've got more power, amazing, but grasp that opportunity, because if you don't, you might start to stagnate in a squiggly career. And it's those two bits that have to go together so that people get the most out of the opportunity and possibility that exists in a squiggly career.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, amazing advice there for everyone listening. And I guess I'm interested, how has this changed? And as you mentioned, the power in some ways is with the individual now. How has it manifested itself in terms of what people are coming to Amazing If for and your podcast? So there are particular recurring themes that keep cropping up that you've seen, particularly in the last 18 months. People are going, I really want your help for X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, so I think there's two things that we have seen both in the sessions that we deliver with organisations and just the direct contact that we have from people, and that is the theme around confidence and possibilities. So maybe if I expand on that a little bit, change is not easy. It affects our confidence. It makes us think, am I doing the right thing? What control do I have over this situation? And doubts can start to really hold us back. So we get a lot of questions to help people with their confidence. And, there are lots of things that we can do there. I think one of the most important things, we talk about caging your confidence gremlins, and I think one of the most important things for people to recognize is that it's often their own thoughts that get in their way. Like, it's not James saying, Helen, you're not very good at podcasting, or that failure that you made, that should really define you for your future. It's not you saying that to me, it's me saying that to me that actually gets in my way. And we create our own stories for ourselves, our own confidence gremlins that get in our way. And one of the most important things that you can do is sometimes use your doubts as data a little bit. Like, what is that voice saying to you? And, we call that like a limiting belief. Like, what is this thing that you're saying to yourself that is getting in your way? And how could you turn that into a limitless belief? So when you are in that moment, when that confidence gremlin rears its head, what can you say to yourself that sounds different and moves you forward? So to give you an example, like on the failure one, that might sound like, at its worst, if I fail, I am a failure. So I've made like an incident my identity. If I fail at talking to James on this podcast, I am a failure for the rest of my career. Not helpful. It means that I will never go on a podcast again. It's not a helpful thing to have a limiting belief. What I might say is, okay, if I fail, I never fail to learn. I may fail, I probably will fail. It's sort of inevitable if you're going to do things differently. But if I fail, I never fail to learn. So the thing that I am going to own is my ability to learn through any situation that I'm in, that I'll grow through what I go through. That is a much more helpful thing for me to say to myself in a situation that I find hard. And so I think confidence in getting people to reframe their beliefs has been an important thing. And then the other thing would be the future possibilities, like helping people to see that there are different directions that they can develop in, and then giving them the tools to do it. Because it's one thing to say it and it's another to see it. So you've got to say to yourself, okay, yeah, I think I can squiggle. And then you're like, just give me some tools, Helen, to help me. And that's what we, to that point of where we started, like one of our business values is useful, which is like a really boring value. But I'm fine with that. We just want we want to give people these tools that they can, explore their possibilities and take some action for themselves. But yeah, they would be the two things I think that most frequently have come to us in the last 6-10 months.
It's so great to hear that. And I'm sure that will resonate with a lot of listeners. And confidence gremlin, it's just a great way it's a great mental image, that gremlin on your shoulder that just kind of gets in the way, and actually just framing it in a more positive light is just such a good way of looking at things. We kind of alluded to the podcast earlier and talking about you guys being very useful in terms of the work you do. I think the podcast, we've certainly felt from our own perspective, it is a great way for people to consume information and learn and be inspired, hopefully. And I know for a fact that you've had an incredible listenership over the years, and it's really an important part of what you do. So how did the idea for the podcast come about, and how has it helped with the overall brand and business? I'd love to learn a bit about your experience of it.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So actually it started with confidence. So when we started the podcast in 2017, because we'd recognized that confidence is a big challenge that's holding people back, and we wanted to write a little ebook to help people. We were like, we can't just do these sessions in London, like we need to help people who aren't in London. Who knew? And so we wrote this ebook on how to cage your confidence gremlins, and we'd identified the 10 most common confidence gremlins, like the one around failure, like senior people, not being liked, being found out. They're some of the most common gremlins that we kind of help people with. And we thought, well, let's do a podcast. We've got the book, got the ebook, we can get that out to people, and then let's do a podcast so that we can reach more people that way. And so we recorded this 10 episode series. And James, we did not know what we were doing. It was super scripted. And the agency that we worked with were like, you're better without the script. Maybe don't have the script and just talk to each other. And that has been a reoccurring theme, that people quite like the dynamic between Sarah and I. And then we kind of heard it then. And we were only ever going to do these episodes. We invested in it with the money that we'd earned from all those evening courses. We put all of that into doing this first thing. And it was just to help people. And honestly, 20 people listened. It did not have. Just not many people listened. But it was fine. I mean, a lot of them were our family, but that was fine. That was fine. But I think we realised that we quite enjoyed doing it. And so our starting point was, maybe we could do that more. And I think it was 2018 when we decided we'd do a weekly podcast, and we'd start to take sort of broader topic areas, not just confidence. And then we just stuck at it. I think the thing, now it's got a large listenership now, and thankfully it's quite what I would call a sticky listenership. Like, people listen through to the end, and lots of people come back and they recommend, and it's the best thing. And I don't really know what the secret of the Squiggly Careers podcast is, but the only thing I do know is that we are just a bit relentless. Like, we drop an episode every week, and we've dropped an episode every week since 2018. And there are something like 235 episodes now. And we sometimes think, will we run out of a topic to talk about on careers? And we haven't yet. And we brought different guests, just like you do, along the way. But I think as long as we are always learning from each other, and as long as you don't get too led by listener numbers, which goes back to that ego point, as long as it's a weekly conversation where Sarah and I learn from each other, that's sort of good enough for us. And it drops the pressure off it being an amazing episode or a brilliant podcast.
Yeah. And it's just, I really admire that, because I must say, I love doing the podcast, but it is quite hard work. And it's because I love talking to people, and I want every conversation to be amazing. And I think just the way you've been able to do it just so consistently, I kind of got drained after doing sort of, I guess it was about 50 episodes on the bounce over a couple of years. And that was kind of monthly. I was just like, I'm going to take a little breather now. So I just have huge admiration for you. There's a lot to learn, but I think there is something about the way you've built that listenership and community it's so consistent. And I think people know what they know what they're getting. Your wonderful dynamic, talking about, actionable things that actually affect us all. So I can totally see how it's so popular, and I really enjoy listening. Can't say I've listened to all 235 episodes, but I've listened to a few.
People that tell us that, they're like, and I think so many things when I say that, I think, oh my gosh, those first ones, I don't want to listen back to them myself. And then I also think you'll remember our podcast probably better than I will. Like sometimes people say to us, oh, in episode 42, you mentioned this model on motivation. And I'm like, I can't remember that model off the top of my head. I'm going to have to listen back.
I honestly, my brain becomes like a sieve these days. So it's just there's not enough space in this small brain of mine. But I'm a big admirer, and it's certainly taught me a lot in terms of just being consistent and keeping it going. So thank you for that. We are getting towards the end of our conversation, but I really want to touch upon community, because from the night classes you were doing in the very early days to a huge listenership on the podcast, what you've clearly done is build a really incredible community that love what you do and clearly get huge benefit from it. Do you have any pointers or advice for anyone listening that's looking to build a community? It might be for a podcast, it might be for a startup or whatever, but what are some of the secrets to your success?
Secrets to success. It sounds so grand, doesn't it? On the community front, it's really strange. Despite both Sarah and I having had quite senior corporate roles in marketing, which included marketing strategy, I think we've really applied that to our own business. So there was never this like strategic intent that was like, let's go build this community. I guess we think about networking, which I think community sort of falls within that, as people helping people. That's how we define networking and amazing, if people helping people. And when you start with what you have got to give, the research on this, which Adam Grant, an academic at Wharton, has done a lot of work on, it shows that the givers get more. And we kind of talk about it as like our language is career karma, like go cultivate career karma. And I actually think our community is just based on that. We try to give as much as we can to help make careers better for everybody. And we try to do that as accessibly as we can. So that what I mean by that is we put a lot out for free. Like obviously the podcast is for free. We create these pod sheets and pod tools. We do Pod Plus every week, which is a free Zoom session that people can join who want to be part of a learning community. And we will always invest in our business to make career development as accessible as we can for everybody. And so I guess we focus a lot on how to be helpful and starting at that point of being a giver. And I think we've done that enough, and we've done it in a genuine enough way that people seem to want to help us in return. And they do that by taking us into their companies, which is amazing, because that's the commercial part of our business is the work that we do there. We don't have to sell to do that. They advocate for us in their organizations, and it's amazing, and it's so generous of them. They will, write us reviews on podcasts, which is always lovely. It's quite motivating, because you have that conversation, and I talk to Sarah, but we don't really know if anyone else listens until someone leaves you the review or they share about it. Otherwise, it's just a digital recording of you talking to your best friend, right, about careers. It's when you get the feedback or the comments that you realise, oh, there is someone that has connected with that concept or has found that idea helpful. And so, I think people just generously give back because we genuinely give to them, and we just try to keep that squiggly cycle going, I suppose. Yeah,
and it's so authentic. And I think that's it. If you're forcing it or ramming stuff down people's throats, it's just not quite the same. Whereas if it's just like, it's selflessly just kind of giving up time to try and add some value and help people with their careers, I think that really comes across, and you can see why that has kind of resulted in that word of mouth growth, and it's just very organic. And it's something that I've always wanted our business to be that way as well. And I think it makes it that much more enjoyable, to be honest with you. And when you don't have to go out and smash down doors and be selling all the time, then that's just an added bonus, isn't it? If you can kind of let your ambassadors and advocates, as you say, do the selling for you. So that's really helpful. Thank you. Final thing before we get to our wrap-up questions, I just want to talk about pivoting careers, because we have lots of candidates that we talk to on a daily basis that come to us because they want to move from banking into tech or maybe leave consulting to do something slightly different. What's your advice for anyone listening to this that wants to change? And what are some of the sort of key criteria people should consider when they're making a big decision about the next step in their career?
So career pivots are increasingly common. I think they're definitely an interesting option for people to explore in their career. I think sometimes one of the things that holds people back from doing a career pivot is they focus more on what they've not got than what they can bring. So it's almost like, I would like to go and work in a completely different industry. But in their mind, they're like, but I don't know anybody there and I don't know that industry very well. And it can really hold them back from either applying in the first place or feeling confident in an initial interview discussion. And I think you have to be confident about the unique things that you bring rather than trying to apologize for what you've not got. So if I'll give you a personal example. When I moved from Virgin to Microsoft, there was a lot that I didn't have. So the initial role I went into Microsoft was to be director of audience evangelism. So I was working in the really deep tech part of that business with people who knew machine learning and AI in and out, and I did not. So I could not compete with that expertise. I didn't know the industry. I didn't know Microsoft. I was not a deep technical specialist. Like, there's no point me attempting to pretend that I was. But what I did bring was a lot of different ideas. I was very creative. I was very pacey. I could make things happen. And I focused more on my unique talents that I was bringing rather than this deep technical knowledge, which they could get from people that were already in the business. If they wanted that, they'd already got it. Why buy me? You're buying me for something different. So I think own your difference. Don't try to, pretend that you're something you're not. And then the second thing that I would say is to build a bridge to the place that you want to pivot to. So you might not be there now, but you can still start to build your brand in that area. So I could have started a blog, for example, about marketing and technology. I could have started to mentor people or get mentored from people in that area. I could have started going to some networking events or be part of communities, either virtual or in person, that operated in that space. And what it would mean is that even though I didn't have the job yet, I was starting to build a profile and a community and an awareness of where I wanted to get to. And I think that shows a lot of willing in an interview when somebody might be placing a bit of a bet on you.
Totally. And it's something we really encourage as well. And sometimes it's actually a really good way of knowing if it's really the right move for you. I think there's often this in the work that we do, a lot of people coming out of big corporations wanting to go into technology startups. They are very, very different, especially if you're going into an early stage business where there aren't the resources. You often have to take a 50% pay cut. And so actually by testing the waters and getting into those ecosystems, whether it's advisory work or pro bono stuff or just going up to meetups and talking to people in the space, sometimes that actually is clarified in other people's minds that actually it might not be quite the right move, but at least they've explored that and they've kind of tested it. So I think that's a really, really good point.
You can practice pivoting as well. Like you can, we talk about like degrees of pivot, and the biggest one is like complete a new job, complete a new industry. That's like a massive pivot. But actually, even within the organization that you might be in at the moment, you can practice pivoting. Like you could just go into a horizontal move, like a completely different function. And that might give you some sense of, how do I adapt quickly? How do I make an impact really quickly? So, it's all likely we're going to do pivots in the future. Start practicing pivots today. That's, do a squiggly horizontal move and you'll learn some of those skills that will help you with your bigger pivots in the future.
Love that. Yeah, thank you, Helen. That's such a good advice. We are sadly at our wrap-up questions. I could talk to you for hours, but we've got 3 to go. The first one is obviously going to be about mentorship. It would be silly not to ask you, do you have a mentor? And if there was one person in the world that could be your mentor, who would it be?
Yes, I have lots of mentors. I'm actually meeting one of them this week. Interestingly, it is an old manager, not old in age. He might not like me for saying that, but it's actually a manager from Virgin. And my top tip actually would be, I think previous managers can make brilliant mentors, particularly if they've been quite challenging to work for, because I think they take on a slightly different context as a future mentor. So yes, I'm meeting one of my old managers who is now my mentor this week. And I really admire, I'm going to aim high, Esther Perel, who is a relationship psychologist. And I think I would love to be mentored by her in terms of how I can really effectively build different relationships with people. I just think her insights into people are fascinating. And I feel that I could build even better relationships if I borrowed a bit of her wisdom. And I think that's what mentorship is all about, is sort of borrowing different people's wisdom. And I think she is someone that I really admire and has bags of it.
That's a great one. Thank you. And given all of the success you've had, and I know you've probably only just scratched the surface in terms of what you're doing with the business, what do you want to be remembered of at the end of your career?
I would like to be remembered for somebody that genuinely cared about people's careers and made a difference in helping them. and that doesn't have to be the world. It could just be a few people who are like, she genuinely cared and made a difference to me in my career. And then I'd be like, that's enough.
Love it. Love it. And finally, for any listeners that might be thinking about setting up a business one day, doing a big career pivot potentially, or just maybe moving in their own organization, what final piece of advice would you leave them with?
I would say run your own race, which is a quote that I refer to a lot and reflect on in my own career. Like, do what's right for you in your way at your pace, and try to avoid being led too much by comparison or expectation. Just, run your own race and you'll find your way through.
Helen, thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy having you on the 40-Minute Mentor, and I know our listeners will have found that super insightful and really inspiring. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your audience.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40-Minute Mentor. There are 2 simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40-Minute Mentor in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket-sized mentorship.